Hi, everyone. My name is Anshuman Bapna. I am the founder of Terra.2 and also the course director for our 12-week Learning for Action program. This program starts out with a keynote from someone who's been a pioneer in the work that they do for climate and sustainability. And I couldn't be more excited to invite Danny Kennedy today. I will introduce Danny in just a second, but just some quick logistical stuff. So this talk is part of our learning cohort, but it's also open to people who are not in the cohort. That includes our alumni, which is almost 7,000 and counting now, and also to the general public who are interested in what's happening in climate and are considering potentially deepening their commitment there. So welcome to all of you. As you can see that this gets pretty busy. So what we do is that we prioritize questions that are coming in from learners in our cohort. But I hope that we have enough time to pick up quite a few from all of you as well who are not in the cohort right now. With that, my last request would be that if you have questions, then please try to hold off until towards the end of Danny's talk, and then I would be moderating. I would be picking up those questions from the chat and from the questions that we already have from our learners. With that, excited to welcome Danny. So Danny, as you can see, is among many other things that he does, a fantastic user of AI to tell us what the pandas are up to all across the world building solar panels. But in addition to that, Danny is a veteran clean tech entrepreneur and ecosystem builder whose work spans activism, company creation, and capital formation. He co-founded Sungevity, one of the early pioneers of remote solar design and residential solar sales, helped launch Powerhouse in Oakland to support solar founders. He was also an early backer of the solar loan leader Mosaic. Before that, he had a fantastic stint as a leader at Greenpeace. And then from 2015 to 2024, he served as the founding CEO of New Energy Nexus, a global platform of funds and accelerators that support climate entrepreneurs across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. He remains a venture partner with NEX's Catalyst Fund. Now, Danny advises organizations including the Sunrise Project and Wollemi Capital and has served in leadership roles linked to the California Clean Energy Fund. Another thing that is of the many things that Danny has done is that he co-hosts a podcast on Audible called Climate of Change with Cate Blanchett and is the author of Rooftop Revolution, a book that came out in 2012. Recently, he's written widely on what's happening with Asia's rooftop solar surge and China's push into virtual power plants, basically signals of a distributed software-orchestrated grid that's arriving faster outside the West. Danny's also a close friend and mentor who has been supporting Terra in so many different ways across 5 years of our work here. With that, Danny, welcome and excited to give the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Anshuman, and thank you everyone for listening to me this morning, my time. Great to be here and welcome to you all. Wonderful to kick off a new cohort of the Terra.do doers. Very exciting to sort of help you imagine your work in this space going forward. It's a great time to get into the game. Probably the best and most important, certainly in the history of humanity, not to put too much pressure on you or anything. But I'm going to try to just sort of level set what you're getting into and what I think we're facing in the next decade or so as a movement and markets and actors in civilization trying to get this climate crisis under control, and then love to get into a conversation with you all. Really excited to learn about what you're doing, although I know we won't have much time for that, but answer any questions and sort of get into the dialogue that I'm sure is the richest way you'll learn in coming weeks with Terra Do. I'm just going to share my screen to sort of start with my deck here. Is that sort of visible to you all? Yep. So, I was asked to speak to this topic du jour, which has also been my sort of favorite thing for a couple of decades now, which is about the solar ascent and the reality that, The Economist wrote about in April of 2024 that we're entering a solar age with a general purpose technology, that is not just AI. It's more important than that. It's the electricity system behind all the ICT and all the things we talk about in the world that is going to be powered directly by sunshine. And we're going to electrify everything ultimately, whereas to date we've only really electrified about a third of our economy, meaning the end uses of energy are still largely powered by combustion processes, and increasingly they will be directly electrified, and the source of the electricity will be photons falling free from the sky every day and being turned into electrons by panels like the one in the picture. So I'm going to try to walk you through that. But to begin, the background to this story is, of course, that we're going through a climate emergency, and I think that's what's motivated many of you to join Terra.do. And I can tell you that this has motivated me too for decades to do this work in different ways. As Anshuman mentioned, I sort of cut my teeth as an activist in the 20th century, railing against the dying of the light and trying to stop extractive industries through human rights documentation and direct action and other things in places as far afield as Australia and Papua New Guinea and Colombia and Nigeria and Nevada. Um, and I kind of turned my hand to solar around the turn of the century when we were still climbing in emissions and we really didn't know what the alternative was. Honestly, there was an open bet at the turn of the century as to whether we needed to shift to nukes or whether, geothermal would become the thing, or wet renewables and maritime systems, because we knew our power sector was the source of most of the emissions. But we didn't know what would be the best way to provide the energy services humanity needs to do all the things we like to do, uh, and we didn't know what could be done cost effectively. The great news is that, while that led to continued pollution of the atmosphere with carbon dioxide through most of the first quarter of this century, around 2015, we started to flatten that curve. It's an analogy which makes sense to us all because we lived through COVID. It's like a virus infecting a body. We've been spilling cells into the system for too long, and we introduced a vaccine somewhere around the teens, which was low cost solar power and renewables broadly, but specifically solar power. And I'll get into why I say that specifically. But what it has meant, here's the good news, is that we have sort of peaked, but that doesn't mean we're declining or diminishing emissions. And in fact, those continue to grow year on year to new heights, but they're sort of on a flat, bobbling plateau. And, our work, your mission, if you choose to accept it going forward from here, is to drive that puppy down and send that curve into oblivion, because we have to get rid of all the carbon in the system in order to actually stop the thermostat going up. Right now, we've seen what works. We know the antidote. We have to do a lot more of it. So we're sort of winning, is my other metaphor than a medical one, a sporting one. We're halfway through the game to 2050, say, when we told ourselves we had to be at net zero. And at the beginning of the second half, where we know what we've got to do to win, but we have to continue to kick goals and not just be on defense but offense and build lots of things. So we'll get into that. But the good news is that is what is happening, broadly speaking. And I track a lot of this stuff by money, share of wallet, world wallet. And as described, the plateau has coincided with the spend. The world is investing more in clean than dirty, and as a result, we're working out what to do. And none of the other things you hear about in the media work as well as this. Um, some of them might contribute, and social change of all kinds is needed for all kinds of other reasons, inequity and fascism, least amongst them. Not least amongst them, I should say. But we've got, a multi-faceted, what do they call it, polycrisis, and intersectional responses. The good news is building out this distributed technology set we're going to talk about, solar and storage, uh, is also a way to contribute to those causes, because that architecture of distributed energy infrastructure also lends itself better to decentralized ownership and democratic control. And those things are sort of antidotes of their own to economic inequity and the concentration of power in the hands of the few, which fossil fuels facilitated very well for a century or more. And not to get too much into the politics of it, but you sort of see the corruption of that, not just in countries which have been more known for it in the past, but here in the United States, where I live, when a president can say in their campaign that they want to raise $1 billion to trash the EPA from the oil industry, and they effectively get that campaign contribution. So that's what we're up against. But the good news is we have a response and a strategy to get to all of these things. Again, just to sort of give you some sense of why I'm cautiously optimistic, because I've seen it myself and I've been involved in building, dozens of businesses, half a dozen of which I started myself, contributing to this, employing hundreds and thousands of people, serving tens and hundreds of thousands of homes and families. And it works, and it's growing like a weed. The CAGR, the compounded annual growth rate, is good. And if we continued it just for the next 5 years, we'd sort of be on path to what we need to do as the world committed to do at COP28, the Convention of Parties of the Climate Convention in Dubai in 2023, 2022, 23, to triple renewables by 2030. This isn't actually quite fast enough, this slope, to match energy demand growth as it's currently projected in some places, particularly given new energy demands like data centers and AI, and we can talk about that if you want. But it is sort of on track to broadly double, nearly triple. We've got to go a little bit faster, and because energy demand growth may go a little bit faster than it has over the recent decades, a bit more like it did in the long boom era of the 1950s in the northern hemisphere, then we might have to go faster still. The good news is the big energy markets, and we'll get to them, are effectively matching energy demand growth with new renewable deployment, particularly solar and storage. This is particularly true in China. And, you know, I have to make the point that we have to thank China for both doing a lot domestically, and I know that this is a a difficult story because they are also doing a lot of bad things domestically on social and economic fronts, and with coal and other uh, development strategies. But they have built out a market for renewables at a speed and scale which is sort of hard to comprehend. And that's helped the world get to the economies of scale that makes this pretty much unstoppable. We're now seeing the lowest cost electricity ever in the history of the world coming out the back of solar panels, because they're made in such volume that they're really cheap. It's a bit like cell phones. Those used to be really expensive, if you remember, and the calls we made on them, we had to pay through the nose for. But as we made them ubiquitous and put, more than enough handsets in everyone's hand, uh, the telephony that came out the back of them became cheap as chips, and we were able to do televisual link ups on Zooms with hundreds of humans in dozens of countries, whereas that was an exorbitant, unimaginable expense when I started my career. That didn't even exist as an option. So we're doing the same thing with this technology set today. And when I say we, broadly, it's China, who continue even this year, which was perceived by many pundits to be potentially a setback year because they changed the rules of their electricity pricing. But it looks like as of yesterday's results for September, which I read because I'm a geek, they're continuing to put in both as much productive capacity, meaning the number of cells coming out of their factories, as well as deployment of photovoltaics and batteries and renewables into the electricity grid to match or exceed energy demand growth in their economy, which is good news for everyone. It really does show in, just comparison to other countries, they have done the heavy lifting. But so too, India, is starting to really crank, and that's very exciting. They have the largest democracy in the world, and the up and coming, fastest growing economy, also way ahead of where it thought it could be when Modi's minister Piyush Goyal first sort of set it on a solar mission, as they call it, the National Solar Mission. And as of this year, they're starting to kick in, and even despite lots of challenges, including relative poverty to other countries, they're able to meet the needs, lift up the aspirations of their community, and grow with this technology set, which is very exciting. Um, so I'm here to tell you that we can still win this game. Where becomes pretty important, and we'll get to that. But, just to underscore the point I've tried to make is that with China's leadership, India's, uh, the rest of Asia, South Asia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, are also champions of this cause. Pakistan probably first amongst them, which is not something you often hear in the press and places, but because uh, a popular movement there has basically started to adopt solar and storage at speed and scale. They've more than tripled their renewables since 2023 by the hands of the many, putting solar up on homes and factories and farms. And that model can be emulated across the globe, and we can leapfrog with the renewable electrification that ensues when you have low cost electricity supply. This is a strategy that makes sense economically. This is not just the wishful thinking of some ex-Greenpeace guy, hippie, whatever I am. It's a reality that the lowest cost electricity, which is really the marker of what we call modern societies, high penetration electricity is one of the necessary ingredients of an advanced economy. There is no lower under electrified country that also has what we consider to be standards of living or quality of life or happiness indicators or any of the rest that doesn't have significant electrification. And the good news is you can get it 24/7 for about $100 a megawatt hour in much of the world, particularly in the world where there's growing demographics, young people getting economically active, reproducing, having children, unlike much of the North and places like Japan. Um, and, even in those places, you can get to two-thirds, three-quarters at this kind of unbeatable price. If you know anything about electricity costs, this is a good number, 10 cents a kilowatt hour combined to create your electricity supply is spanking. And so it's an economic proposition. It's also just a no-brainer when you think about it, because the solar that we're importing around the world, and remember, majority of countries, 70, 80% of countries are fossil fuel importers. They're not producers, self-reliant in any sense of the word. And what we get with this is a different kind of dependency. When you're playing on the spot market for coal, oil, or gas as your energy supply, you're prone to fickle fuckers, if you'll excuse my French, from Russia or wherever. on a weekly spot market. Whereas if you're buying your solar panels, you're kind of generationally dependent perhaps on importing them, or you could take that 20 years to build a manufacturing capacity of your own. Another way to actually think about this is just like what a shipload of solar panels, and I'm assuming I didn't do the 101 on how solar works, but you've seen enough photovoltaics in your life, whether it's on your watch or on your house or down the street on a field. When you ship a load of those in to your country, your community, your neighborhood, whatever it is, you're displacing the equivalent of, many ships full of liquefied natural gas at pressure at great risk, again, purchased on a spot market, which is prone to crazy price rises when countries get invaded and all the things, or many more ships full of coal, which comes with all sorts of baggage and damage and extraction stuff. So we've got lots of advantages. We need to deliver those advantages to these places where it matters. And this is one of the things that I often stress, and glad to see on this call that there's so many folk from I saw dialing in from all kinds of parts of Asia, Singapore, where I've just been last week, the regional hub of Southeast Asia, the ASEAN community. That is a critical part of the world. Asia is where energy demand growth is and is going to grow. Uh, Air conditioning in Asia, just the real felt need for cooling your kids at night, because in Karachi, the temperature doesn't go below 30 degrees sometimes, is going to drive electricity demand. And that's a bigger motive force than whether or not I get to use OpenAI easily, honestly. I know that there will be a pull for energy demand here in the States. There already is for data centers, but I'm just saying AC is greater than DC in Asia and Africa. I noticed folk from Kampala and Addis Ababa and elsewhere dialing in. That's yet to even begin really on the energy consumption curve. There's still 600 million humans who've barely seen electricity service. So what the ceiling is hard to imagine, but that's where the growth is, Asia and Africa in large part. And that's where we've got to go, just to get sort of pointed about it and focus for your purposes as you contemplate a career in climate. I want people to think about highest best use. And we need more renewables in the system sooner. You get that. Solar and storage works. We need it where there is economic demand, which is where there is economic growth and where people are coming up on the energy access ladder, as they call it, from say 1,000 kWh per annum per capita in Indonesia to maybe 5,000 kWh per annum per capita as they buy an electric scooter and get some air conditioning at home and use the fridge more often like we do in the West. We're at 10,000 kWh per annum per capita here in America. When I say we, punks like me in Australia or America, etc. So you know where to sort of focus your effort and you know what to do, which is distributed renewables. That's the antidote, the vaccine, the thing that works best and fastest. Because ultimately this is a deployment pace or race. What matters now is the time value of carbon. If we bend this curve, but bend it in the 2070s, we're screwed. If we get it down to zero by 2050, we might be all right. I think 2040 is a safe bet. So we've got to work really hard in the next 15 years to bend that down. And what's the thing that works fastest? It's not nukes. It's not coal with CCS, which is still imaginary. It's not other renewable technologies, honestly. One of the reasons I left the commercialization game, which I did for a decade managing the California Clean Energy Fund, is we've got the widget we know works. We know which mousetrap we need. We just need to go at speed and scale. Speaking of which, I've got to go at a bit faster speed and scale. But I just want to tell you that it is happening and the numbers don't lie. I tend to fall back on the follow the money trick, as I mentioned earlier. And what's growing fastest around the world is distributed solar, uh, mostly with batteries attached, about 60% of the time with batteries, so that we get what we call firm power. Why is it spreading fast? Because it's easy to get the decision done. Whereas, like in Pakistan, what was happening was there was a stall in building out renewables because they couldn't get to FID, final investment decision, on large utility scale wind and solar projects to produce new electricity supply. So people took it into their own hands to do it. The incentives are many. They're not just quick electricity. There's also just an economic boon to the buyer of the product. And we sort of misunderstand this, where the value in the value chain is. Manufacturing is a mug's game. It's tough, it's cutthroat, it's highly competitive, it's very commoditized. So, countries that are wondering whether or not they should go solar, or wait until they build their own manufacturing capacity before importing a bunch of Chinese panels, or whatever the question, I think are asking the wrong ones, because the real value is in the installation and sales, and then the savings over time from the system. As we mentioned, there's also a security angle to this. In this day and age, with the geopolitics and uncertainty we're at, being dependent on imports of gas from Uncle Sam or Russia or wherever, for many of these importing countries, is just not a good option. Whereas being import dependent on a 25-year timeline, or even better, building your own technology capacity to be interdependent with other countries, is a really good look. And that's why, again, just want to show you that it's working. We are displacing fossils net. New additions this year are like 80+% solar and storage. Then there's a bunch of wind and some other stuff. There's a lot of media coverage and column inches on gas and whatever else, but this is where the world is going. I'm going to finish here and not get into my bit about batteries, because I've run out of time and want to get to your questions. But I'm trying to think about ways that, the project managers and engineers and data folks and policy and finance people and actual operators and early stage founders that I believe are in the mix on this Zoom, the audience at Terra Do, this cohort, can get into. And there's no end of opportunities, is my message for you, because what we're basically selling is electrotech, an electric vision, an opportunity to better your lives, your communities, your countries, by doing this thing that is the hallmark of civilization since the beginning of the 20th century. It's just a job that hasn't been completed yet. All the things that we did with combustion, can be replaced. We started with getting rid of the whale blubber in the lamps at home because that was sooty and smoky and required the mass murder of lots of magnificent, charismatic megafauna. But, lighting was not where we finished with electrification. We went on to electrify a lot of other end uses of energy. And now we're getting into our transport with electric cars that we're familiar with, but also electric bikes and scooters and buses and trucks and boats, those things. The storage of electricity is the big game change that, I could bore you with, where I'm sort of spending a lot of my time. Batteries, but also all the things we need to do for cooling and heating and industrial heat, and the so-called hard to abate sectors, which just have to be abated, but can also be electrified, whether it's metallurgy and steel making or cement processes or other things. Ultimately, we will go there. But for you, it's selling and stitching together all these things. The software layer that makes all this smart and interoperable is really critical. The finance that makes this flow. And if you think about it, it's mostly consumer finance. It's not big ticket project finance or multilateral development bank stuff. This is the business of how do you help a home buy an induction stove, or wrap into their mortgage the solar panels and battery on the house, or what's the policy that supports this guy to continue to make this decision to go down there and to the market and buy this at the bazaar and install it on his home. That's kind of our opportunity space. I know that's a bit of a weird way to leave you, but I want to get to your questions and hope that that was helpful as a setup and inspiration for where you can go. We've got to fill in these missing pieces. Geographically, I think you get where they're at. that doesn't mean someone sitting in the States can't be involved. I am mustering money, organizing the intelligence layer, the data sets, the analytics, all the things, setting up the learning platforms, as Anshuman has done from just down the road from me here in California. All that work needs to be done, and really welcome you to it. Shine on.
Thank you, Danny. That was amazing, and really, really cool to see all the data across the world and how solar is getting deployed. Um, I'm looking at the questions, and there is a line of questions that I thought would I could compile them together into one specific type, which is um concerns around the life cycle of solar projects, so to speak. So everything from rare earth extraction to what happens as you deploy them. How do we center equity and justice in the communities that's happening? What happens to recycling of these solar panels and kind of the policy framework that allows all of that to happen? So if you could just maybe step back for a second on how should we think about the environmental impact of this massive transition into solar, that would be very helpful to a bunch of us.
Yeah, I'm used to this question coming up, and as I mentioned, I started my career in fighting extractive industries and mines and the like, and have found myself in the strange situation later in my career, kind of advocating for holes in the ground in various places, because I feel like we need some in order to get these things built and the work done. Um, the difference is we're talking about metals largely. Like the material in this economy is a metal technology set, and fossil fuels are a carbohydrate, hydrocarbon rather, reverse. And the hydrocarbon gets aspirated by being burnt and sent into the atmosphere. And so it's a once through system versus a potentially circular system. Its size and volume is also just significantly different. And I think, to level set as you start your climate careers, we should think about this. Asterix, this is no excuse for fucking people over while digging up metals. This is no excuse for poisoning people with batteries when you recycle them. This is no excuse for not doing a full environmental impact assessment, social impact assessment, and human rights study for the communities impacted by the development of the infrastructure. But just to kind of grok the numbers, I got my friend Sol Griffith, who, if you don't know, you should look up, writes about this stuff very well, wrote a book called Electrify, which is kind of one of the good ones in the set this decade. Um, an Australian, you know, very wealthy, 25 million people sitting down there in the sunshine, uses a lot of electricity. We do a lot of things. We watch a lot of pornography. We do a lot of air conditioning, have pool pumps, refrigerators, cold beer, warm showers, whatever. So all that electricity requires, in a fossil fueled lifestyle, about, I'm going to just say broad numbers from memory, 6,000 kilograms of fuel, coal, oil, gas, whichever mix you want. You then combine that with oxygen, right? That's what burning is, CO2, 2 parts oxygen to every piece of carbon comes out of the fuel when you put it through the thermal combustion engine. That goes into the atmosphere. That's stuff, that's material. We forget about this because it's kind of an invisible gas, but it's the thing that's killing us and our children rapidly. That's another 15,000 kilograms or something or other. And then there's a bunch of stuff in the burning, the turbines, the Tonka trucks to dig the stuff up. There's a bunch of ash and waste streams. Total, call it 22,000 kilograms of stuff, something in that order, to run my lifestyle as an Australian living in Sydney, enjoying my life. You shift that to a renewable electricity supply. So you've got a bunch of solar panels, some wind farms out back, bunch of batteries, bunch of poles and wires, stitching it all together. What's that? It's steel, it's some carbon fiber, it's some aluminium, it's some glass, which is a quartz substrate, silicon. You got the silicon cells, you got some manganese, cobalt, nickel, etc., right? A bunch of metals, probably in the order of 1,000 kilograms, runs the same electricity. The thing is, it runs it over and over again. Every day the sun comes up and the wind blows, it captures it, it stores it in the batteries. At the end of the life, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, depending on the technology, that stuff gets recycled. If you recycle it, that's a big if. We've got to do the politics and policy and reality of that. But say you get to 70% recycled, which economically is very sensible. And let me tell you, CATL, BYD, the largest battery makers in the world, their technology roadmap right now is to be mineral independent by 2042. They've got like a path line to recapturing and recycling all the materials because it's much more expensive to go back to raw material extraction in the Congo or Australia or wherever than it is to go collect the stuff and use it again. So if you get there, you're talking about a 250 kilogram per person per annum requirement of resource to the 22,000 per annum. It's just a significant difference that I think we have to be real about. Do we have to get that 1,000 kilogram, 250 kilogram thing right? Do we have to fight for that? Do we have to set the politics and policy? Yes, we do, but it's just a different quantum that we should start with in our heads. And the fossil fuel industry wants to obfuscate this and they want to tell you that it's just as bad and it's, moral equivalency and whatever. Don't believe it. We've had 2 centuries of people and place being destroyed in pursuit of profit. We have an opportunity to actually hook ourselves to the one income we actually continue to get from outer space, sunshine, and build a circular economy that can deliver all the things you all take for granted for all the people that don't get that today without that impact. And it's a decade hence if we do the work.
Fantastic. Thank you, Danny. Uh, Picking up another question that I see repeated multiple times in different shapes and forms is about narrative and storytelling. So Somi asked this question, so does Ruby, which is, where does storytelling fit in accelerating the clean energy transition? Now, can creative media drive solar adoption? Can we go beyond just compliance to collective action that makes solar, so to speak, sexy and just the thing that we talk about?
You're singing my song. I'm a big believer that, humans are the stories they tell themselves. We sort of manifest what we discuss and discourse, and right now there's a bit too much doomerism, warranted at some level. No joke. In California, I've heard this morning of the National Guard mustering over in Half Moon Bay over the hills here, to support ICE coming into town. It's kind of crazy times. For those of you outside the country, you may not understand that reference, but we're facing it politically, physically. The weather is getting weird. What we said would happen this decade is happening. The Los Angeles burnt down in January. That's not the fire season. They haven't rebuilt it because they can't, because there's no money in the system, because it's not insured, because they can't, because it's uninsurable. All the things we projected decades ago, for those of you that have been in the game, are coming to pass, and it's pretty grim. And yet there's what I just told you. We're a decade or two from getting a lot of what we need, what modernity wants, without needing to screw the pooch like that and fight amongst ourselves and having this scarcity mindset that has driven so many to this competitivist, cynical mode and fed the fascistic impulses of some and the racism and the rest. We have an option to build something much better and more beautiful. Like that's a storytelling task. That's giving people that vision and understanding that that's the near future, not sci-fi, but cli-fi. This is what we're going to do. We're going to create that future. We're going to imagine it together and we're going to envision it and then reverse engineer it and walk the path together. And no one's ever done it before because we're coming out of a place. but storytelling for that is critical, and I don't think we as a community um, do enough of imagining those better futures and sharing them and co-creating them. I've been very involved with something, I'm happy to point you to called Future Keepers. It's just a fun sandbox experiment trying to use new technology, not afraid of AI as much as wanting to understand how to use it as a tool set. So synthetic media, storytelling of some of this stuff, been really big in Urdu lately on Instagram. Uh, got tens of thousands of followers there in Pakistan, sharing the joy about the fact that Pakistan's leading the world, like I said, in this transition. No one gives it credit for that in the lamestream, mainstream media, whatever we call that. But that's the facts. And they should know it and be proud of it and continue to lean in on it and get the government to continue to support the policies that allow the solar rush, as they call it in Islamabad, to roll forward. So what can we do in our own audiences, in our own niches, in our own lives, with our own communities? That's up to you, but encourage you to connect and get, you know, subscribe and share and follow Future Keepers, if nothing else. But ping me on LinkedIn and we've got to build these networks. That's why I love Terra Do. Like you guys are building really like an MBA, it's not what you're going to learn from people like me. It's who you meet and what you're going to learn from your peers over the next 12 weeks that's going to matter. And that network is going to serve you for life, whereas whatever I said is going to be forgotten 2 years from now. But the 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 piece of connectivity and breaking bread, as you might do, even if it's virtually, and telling stories of one another's ambitions or desires or aspirations in this work is critical. That's a kind of storytelling, one-on-one. Broadcasting that, making that bigger, we got to do that too. So yes and yes and yes, I think, to answer the question.
Fantastic. Danny, just to small coda to that, I see a note from Abby Wilson, who's a Terra alum and early stage founder. And she says our startup focuses on democratizing access to solar technologies in West Africa. Any advice on pre-seed funding sources for this work? If you have something right off the bat, that's great. Otherwise, I'll follow up with you to see if you can help Abby.
Pre-seed funding for what was the technology? Sorry, solar.
Democratizing access to solar technologies in West Africa.
Um, I'm not going to lie, it's a tough time to find seed and pre-seed funding for a lot of businesses as people sort of recalibrate in the current geopolitical world. But happy to chat afterwards and in the West African market. There's certainly a lot of uptake and a lot of reason to believe. If we're talking Nigeria, I'm a little bit familiar with it from a lot of work there in the 90s. For those of you that don't know Nigeria, Nigeria is a very large country, a couple 100 million humans, about 5 gigawatts of electricity on the grid, which is nothing, like nothing, because it breaks down a lot. So they've got the unreliable power supply that many people in the world labor under, 6 hour power sort of stories, very expensive. And most middle class Nigerians supplement their electricity with diesel generators. There's something like 17 million, 17 million diesel generators in the country. And while we all know Nigeria as an oil exporter, the sad truth is Nigeria is not really much of a refiner. It has to export crude and import finished products. So it buys back the fuel it sent out as diesel at high cost and then makes electricity through very inefficient, dumb machines that really haven't been innovated for 100 years. So all those diesel gensets can be displaced with solar and storage. Like that's shooting fish in a barrel as a business. Like, the money these people have to spend on maintaining backup power systems is ridiculous. And why Abby's thumbs up is because it's an easy game to go sell this stuff, except that the diesel mafia, if you will, the incumbency and the existing electricity grid operators and the kind of mental model of the country is to continue to addict themselves to fossil fuels, particularly oil and gas. So business model innovation, financial innovation to reduce the upfront cost in West Africa, I'm sure is probably where Abby's playing. Not to speak for you, Abby, but it's a huge opportunity space, 17 million diesel gensets. That's a total addressable market, really, for some business models. That's a lot. You can do that all day long. I've supported a number of businesses doing that. So yes, happy to chat later and encourage all of you to think about your piece of that. If you're a software engineer, you might not think about you having any access to that opportunity space, but actually what's going to end up needing to happen is connecting all those assets one to the other and making them smart and interoperable in virtual power plants, which is, what the Australians and the Chinese and the more advanced energy transition markets are doing at incredible scale these days. And the code for that and the protocols for that what I call the electric protocol, the right to choose to go solar and have storage, the right to connect it to a grid so you can share it with your neighbors, and the right to be compensated fairly for it. That's all going to be mediated by software. So that's like a huge in for any of you in that business, as an example.
Danny, I see a line of question which I think is very interesting in how it reverses the logic, which is a line of questions around what can the West learn from Africa, what's happening in Southeast Asia right now with solar deployment that would potentially break the bottleneck here? And so what kind of strategies or kind of policies, if you were to wave a wand, what would that look like?
Yeah, so much, the hubris of the West and the current American condition, or our America, as I say these days, thinking we're going to reinvent again something that, like the nuclear technology stack in the time required. I mean, is the possibility of innovation and ingenuity there over decades? Yes, but we don't have decades. We've got years if we take the climate science seriously. So, just the lesson learned that we should take what we're being offered, and this is the story of Pakistan and Southeast Asian countries and ASEAN and West and East Africa and South Africa these days. They're just importing Chinese product as quick as they can because it works, it's really good, and they want to deploy it. You know, I use the light bulb as a metaphor for this to some degree. Like we used to have shitty incandescent bulbs that replaced the whale blubber and kerosene lamps of the prior sort of era. You might remember incandescents. They're no longer legal in my state, but a dumb way of using, a heated piece of wire to light the room and cast lumens on the ground. And then we had fluorescence and compact fluorescence, and now LEDs, light emitting diodes. You know, when that technology was pioneered and California was a big piece of it, like the business I used to run, the California Clean Energy Fund, worked with the California Energy Commission, who mandated LEDs as an example, creating a market in a wealthy place with a large population that pulled demand through for these LEDs. Then the Chinese sort of took over and became the dominant manufacturer of these commodities. Now that's no longer as strong a dominance because they're less than half, maybe 30% of the market, while others have diversified and created higher end LEDs and special ones, or decided that light is a sufficiently important good at night that they should have some domestic manufacturing capability. And so they've had an industrial policy to reshore or onshore manufacturing of light bulbs. But we didn't stop them making light bulbs is what I'm trying to get to. The light was the thing we wanted, and they had better light bulbs for less, like the lumen cost less per unit. And so we consumed it, and that was just in the last 15 years that transition took place. Guess what? That's now possible with electricity itself. It's actually a very similar machine. Instead of sticking electrons into a diode and sending out photons, you stick photons into a diode and send out electrons. It's kind of a reverse light bulb. That's what a photovoltaic is. We are now producing them at a level of unimaginable volumes, like 1.2 terawatts, 1,200 gigawatts gobbledygook to most of you, I'm sure, but lots and lots of these things, lots and lots of light bulbs. And the world is starting to say, oh, when I say the world, the West, the US, Europe, starting to say, oh, we don't want that. We're going to go over here and commercialize the sucking of CO2 out of something and sequestering it somewhere that we haven't actually worked out any science behind yet. But we're going to do that instead because while we accept climate science, we can't accept the solution we have at hand. And meanwhile, to learn a lesson from our friends in Africa and Asia, they're just saying, "Fuck that! I'm going to take the thing that's on hand, that's cheap, works. I'm going to get light at night. I'm going to do the thing." That's my top of mind lesson. I mean, there are so many more around community-based needs and aspirations. I mean, Indonesia's president, Prabowo, has recently just mandated that there should be 100 gigawatts of solar at the village level. 100 gigawatts is basically the electricity system of Indonesia to date in history. And they're planning by 2035 to build out 100 gigawatts of 1 megawatt solar systems with 4 megawatt hour arrays. And it's going to be owned through an agency called Koperasi Merah, which is the cooperative village economic development agency of the country of Indonesia. There's a vision for you. There's a rural economic opportunity creation engine for a country of 300 million humans that the West would be, really well served to think about things like that rather than how do we bend over backwards to make these blokes with big data demands just take over our electricity grids and raise our electricity prices on us, as an example.
Danny, I think we might have time for this one last question right now, but I can assure you that there are dozens more in the chat. And we'll try to see if we can at least pick up some of those questions during our own learning sessions and channel you into those answers. But this question is kind of switching gears a little bit, and this is from Arun. And his question is, uh, your career path. So you've been through. So as Arun puts it, that you, as he sees it, you do not have a technical background before getting into solar and electrification. How do you suggest that those without technical backgrounds follow your track? What level of education is needed? And just generalize this question to how do we kind of start to emulate the amazing trajectory that you've had with your career? Where do we start and what do we look out for?
Um, I would say the technical is not the lack. We need good engineers, soft and hard technology stacks, but all of y'all are needed in this effort, like every skill you bring to it, particularly the soft ones, the storytelling, finance is a critical function, which, I've sort of self-taught myself how to play in that world because it's the grease that we need on the skids to make it go faster. But the business model innovation, the interconnection of humans and skills and stuff. And so, I mean, what do we need? Or what do you need is really just a willingness and a persistence, I think, the grit to get it done. And I know many of you are founders and have done your own startups and stuff. So probably have some of that instinct. And a preparedness to just go again. I coined a term in the book I wrote in 2012, the solar coaster. And this is that, it's never easy. Like the straight line up that all those graphs I showed of renewables is actually just, hiding the truth of the detail at the granular level. It's a mess. And you got to be willing to just keep going no matter what the setbacks. So, having community and peer groups like this as a support act, I think is a great start, a foundational asset to a career in this game. And then that bloody mindedness and willingness to pursue it, because it's the right thing to do and nothing better, honestly. What else would you do with your life at this point in history? So, yeah, I don't know. I'm not one to say you got to go get an MBA, last person to say that. Do a Terra Do course and then just get on with it is my answer. The premise is set. You're going to be pushing boulders uphill for a long time, but we might finally get that plateau to peak and go down, which is the key. So thanks for trying.
That was a lovely answer, Danny. Thank you. Maybe if I could just sneak in one personal question, which is this work gets hard, right? And it has lately gotten harder last many months, at least to my reckoning. Personally, what do you do to just step back, reset, recharge, and get back into the game?
Uh, Probably the wrong person to ask, Anshuman, because the last little passage is a minor wrinkle compared to some things I've experienced. But all the things. I mean, I take great uh, solace in family and friends, and again, I think betting yourself in a community like this is a lifelong investment that's greater than the little bits of learning you might get from folk like me. So, congrats to you, Anshuman, for building the organization to provide that for these folk. Um, I also do think it's a little bit of mindset, and that's a discipline and a kind of an attitude you have to cultivate. I mean, the premise is set. Like I said, we'll be pushing boulders uphill for a long time. It's up to you whether you make that a tragedy or a drama or a rom-com and an action film. Which do you want in life? And this is fun. Like I say, what else would you do? I mean, you could go get a fucking job and make a bunch of money being an asshole, selling gas on the market while it's still needed. And I know people that chose that, and they have, misery guts. You could not be able to speak to your children at the end of your life, as per Elon Musk's fate. Or you could be a good person, do the right work at the right time.
That's a lovely message to close off on. Thank you, Danny. This is such a cracker of a start to our cohort, and this will be the fodder for a lot of our discussion in the upcoming weeks. Again, thank you so much for speaking from your heart. I think this is the highest count of four-letter words that we've had in any keynote address, and I'm very, very proud of that. So thank you, Danny, for keeping it real, and thanks everyone else for taking time.